Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, May 13th, 2025 study session of the Olympia City Council. For the record, we have a quorum with all council members present tonight. And our first and only item on our agenda tonight is a discussion around budget sustainability for the city's 2026 operating budget. And presenting tonight is a whole slew of folks from the city. But first, I'll turn it over to our city manager, Jay Burney.
Thank you, Mayor, council members. Again, for the record, Jay Burney, city manager. At your January retreat, there was agreement that continued discussion of our long-term budget sustainability was a top priority of the council. You had also requested that we start our budget discussions for the 2026 budget earlier in the year than is our normal process. So we've added a couple of extra study sessions, and the 2026 budget will be a significant part of your mid-year retreat agenda as well. Tonight is really about setting the stage for the 2026 budget, providing you some updates and information to you on some topics discussed at the January retreat. We are not asking council tonight necessarily to make any decisions, but rather making sure we're all on the same page about where we are and where we're going. And a big part of that is answering some of your questions that came up in the January retreat as we got going. As I move into the presentation, I do want to just give out some thank yous. I want to thank the finance team, as always, for their work to pull all these numbers together and get things to me. I also want to thank Assistant City Manager Debbie Sullivan. In the absence of a finance director who will be here in a month, which we're all happy about, Debbie's done a lot of heavy lifting with me to help pull presentations together, pull the information together, and make sure I have what I need to give you the stuff tonight. So I just want to thank Debbie and the finance team, and Silvana for her work on this as well, and then all the department directors that are here. And then lastly, for a good conversation with Finance Committee to help set the agenda for this conversation and future conversations. So in terms of the agenda, we'll begin with a look at where we are at the end of the first quarter in terms of our revenues and expenditures. Although most of our discussion tonight is forward thinking around the 2026 budget, how we finish 2025 will impact our 2026 budget discussions. Decisions made at the federal level may have impact at the local level in terms of spending and the associated impacts it could have on our sales tax revenues, so we'll look at that. Our tax team is here to give you a look at different options and impacts of changes to our B&O tax. We'll talk about parks funding and some sunset clauses that bring some dollars back to the general fund for your 2026 budget. We'll discuss some other factors affecting our budget and then end with the priority-based budget and update with Debbie Sullivan. We had hoped to bring you some updated comparable cities information to this first update that we have for you, but our consultant had a last-minute family event that she couldn't rearrange her schedule for, and we agreed with that. So we'll bring all that to you at the mid-year retreat. It'll still be timely for you at then. We'll take questions along the way. I'll also pause between each section and just make sure we've got everything covered before we move on. For the revenue and expenditure update, we're going to look at where we are with fund balance, as well as our revenues collected to date and our expenditures. I do want to note that it's early in the year, so it's tough to make any significant conclusions as some revenues come in larger chunks throughout the year, and some expenses are paid out early in the year versus over the course of the year. So this is just a moment in time that we'll look at. Later in the presentation, we start to discuss the mid-year retreat items. I'll talk about some of the other items that I'm tracking that we'll look at further in June. So we have closed out the 2024 budget, so we know where we are in terms of our overall fund balance. In November, when we were projecting fund balance forward, we had hoped to close out 2024 and have around $3 million in fund balance above the minimum 10% reserve. We are right around 2.8, so we're pretty close. It's a little bit less than I shared with finance a bit ago as we continue to close out the numbers, but 2.8, and we thought we'd be at $3 million. We're pretty close. As a reminder, our overall policy that's set by council is to have a fund balance that is a minimum of 10% and a maximum of 25%. So with the fund balance of $14.3 million, we're right about 12.5% as your total fund balance. Last year, we made some decisions mid-year to reduce spending to build our fund balance, and we're going to talk a little bit later in this presentation around building fund capacity for our budget moving forward. Any questions here? Okay. In terms of revenues, We are about 25% way through the year, so generally we want to see revenues, collections be around that same percentage in a perfect world. We are pretty close with a few outliers. As you know, property tax comes in 2 large payments in May and October, but we expect to be on budget when those payments come in. In terms of sales tax, we ended March $50,000 ahead of budget, but I just circulated to all of you our April numbers. For April, we ended the month down a little over $200,000, so we are under projections for sales tax at this point. So again, it's early, but it's an indicator, and continue to pay attention to that in the next couple of months will start to guide some of our decisions. One of my concerns as we monitor this year is spending impacts due to tariffs and our concerns over the economy. We have seen our first decline early in the year, and again, May data will be a significant indicator for us in terms of decision-making around potential cutbacks on expenditures throughout the rest of the year. There are other significant revenues that are generally on pace and where we expected them. The charges for service category that's up there, that seems pretty low. It isn't linear as we receive some of those revenues later in the year for things like parks program fees for summer activities, and they start to catch up. In terms of expenditures, we are generally on target overall. The big number around the capital outlay that you see there, that's 188.2%, is due to some armory expenditures that will be covered through the first quarter budget amendment you just approved last week. So that number will balance out, won't look like such an outlier once that is factored in. Again, overall, we are on track, and I don't have any specific concerns at this stage about where we are with expenditures because we're generally tracking. Any questions around any of the revenues and expenditures before I move on? I've got the finance team to help with the tough questions. We good here? Okay, so Brandy Andrews is at the table and Thomas Donnelly behind her, so I'd like to invite Brandy from our finance team to walk you through some B&O tax considerations. As they begin, I do want to state that we are not making decisions tonight around any B&O tax increase, only looking at some scenarios that we shared with the Finance Committee at one of their last meetings. One other consideration of note is that the budget proposal in front of the governor does include a state B&O tax increase. I just sent you about a couple hours ago the latest and greatest on that, but I haven't had time to sort through yet with staff what that looks like and how that could impact Olympia businesses. But we're certainly going to want to understand those impacts as this conversation continues over the next several months as part of our budget process. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brandy. I'm going to pass that down, Debbie.
Hi everyone, Brandy Andrews, tax and license financial analyst. This is the agenda for this section of the evening, I guess. I just thought we'd review what's on the table. As Jay mentioned, we're looking to find more revenue, and one of the ways to do that is to raise the tax rate on the business tax, the B&O tax. And so the City Council asked us to sort of cost that out, 2 or 3 scenarios, and so that's what you'll find here. Before we go into our estimates of the impacts on the B&O tax revenue, we just wanted to set the stage by considering like, what our business taxpayers look like on average. And we did a bit of work to split all of the businesses geographically. Our GIS team helped us tag each of the businesses with either an east side, west side, inside, or outside tag, and you'll see that on the slides. And then we've looked at things also by NAICS classification and then by the type of business classification that the businesses report on our tax returns. And then at the end, we will look at our estimates for the impacts from the scenarios that you requested, and then talk a little bit about exemptions. So the proposal, I guess the proposed changes are, there's 3 of them. The first one is to raise the B&O tax rate for the retail classification of business Right now, all the businesses report in one of 7 business classifications, or they pay tax by reporting their business in retail, wholesale, manufacturing, those kinds of things. And they either pay $1 per $1,000 of income or $2. And the maximum rate that we can charge without a vote of the people in the community is $2 per $1,000 of business income. And all but one of our business classifications is at the lower rate right now. And so the proposal is to raise the retail rates from $1 up to $2. And then the other 2 scenarios have to do with the zero tax due threshold. We have already a sort of a protection for the small businesses. If a business earns from our community or doing business here less than $20,000 in income in a year, they don't have to pay B&O tax. And so the 2 scenarios are raising that threshold from $20,000 up to $200,000 or from $20,000 up to $500,000. And so those are the proposed changes. So the next few slides, like I mentioned, are just to get a better feel for the businesses that are currently doing business here. And so this first slide here shows you our current B&O tax revenues split by the geography and also the number of taxpayers and then the average tax paid. So you can see that on the revenue side, they're pretty evenly split, east side, west side, and outside, with downtown being much smaller. The number of taxpayers, there's a lot more taxpayers who are located outside, but they on average pay a lot less in their B&O tax. This slide is all of our B&O taxpayers. It's split by their business activity, so manufacturing, printing, retail service. So those are the 7 business categories that they can report on our tax return. And it's also split by geography. We have all businesses together, the west side, downtown, east side, and outside. And the median size of the business is what's shown in the table there. And so just to pull out a couple numbers, the median gross revenue or income of a manufacturing business is $24,000 in the year, whereas that's the all business on average. If we look at it just for the downtown businesses, it would be $111,000. And you can see the biggest one there really is the west. The west side retailing number is the largest. Makes sense, right?
Yes. One moment,
Yeah.
Brandy. Councilmember Madrone.
Hi, Brandy.
Hi.
What's the difference between retail service and retailing?
Yeah, good question. Retailing is just what you'd expect. It's those who are, ringing up at their cash register. It includes those. The retail service is the same sort of activity, but it's for a very narrow list of business types, garages, tanning salons. It's like a little collection of businesses that maybe are a bit hybrid between service and retail. Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
So Brandy, would you say it's sort of like intangible things, like services?
The retail service one?
Yeah, versus retailing would be I'm going to buy an item.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to put it, I think, yeah.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful.
All right, this is showing the number of taxpayers within the different geographies, east side, west side, downtown, and outside. But And this time we're showing the NAICS classification that the business reports, their main NAICS category. And I just wanted to point out that, a business that is in, say, the accommodation and food service, NAICS, they could report one of many categories on our tax form. For example, they could report retail, they could report service and other, they could report wholesaling. And so our tax forms contain more detail, I guess is one way to say it. So just looking at the numbers there, you can see that there are a lot more taxpayers outside of Olympia. And the biggest category there is the construction NAICS category. And that makes sense too. Yeah. This is a similar slide, but it shows the average size of the business. So this would be their gross income divided by the number of tax filers. And so this is just giving you a feel for the average size of the business operating here across the different NAICS groups and in the different areas of the different geographies. All right. And that concludes the little section, just sort of giving a feel for the businesses. Now we wanted to turn our attention to our estimates of the impacts of changing the B&O tax program. And there's 2 or 3 slides here. This first slide summarizes in 2 tables the scenario of raising the retail rate from $1 per thousand to $2 per thousand. That's in that first the column there that says increase retail rate. And then it also shows the impact if we change our no tax due threshold so that we create more $0 tax filers. That's why you see the first one, the revenues will increase, whereas the second one, the revenue will be decreasing our B&O tax revenues if we increase our no tax due threshold. And then the last column shows the combination of those 2 changes, and it's not going to be completely additive because if you raise your no tax due threshold, you'll be creating some $0 filers that didn't exist, and so those 2 columns, you can't quite add them, but the last column does the true combination. And so for the first scenario, raising the retail rate, we would estimate that our B&O tax revenues would increase by about $2.6 million if that's all we did. If we did that and raised our no tax due threshold up to $200,000, we would be raising our B&O tax revenues by $2.3 million instead, with the difference being the new $0 tax filers. And then the other scenario is in the bottom table. The first column there, the increasing the retail rate, it's the same number, but the raising the threshold is a little bit more significant because we would be sort of protecting the businesses now defined as small business. They would be defined as those generating less than $500,000 of income from our jurisdiction. And so if we did both of those changes instead, we would estimate we'd increase our B&O tax revenue by about $1.9 million. And this slide just shows the numbers of businesses impacted. So these aren't dollars, these are just taxpayers. The table on the left shows where everybody lies today. West side, downtown, east side, outside, the number of taxpayers, and then the $0 filers are in the middle column there, and then those paying some tax. So that's where we are on the left. And if we changed our thresholds, we create about 2,300 more $0 tax filers, and about 1,400 of those would be getting higher retail rates and paying higher B&O tax in the retail. And then this last slide here is the scenario where we'd raise our no tax due threshold up to 500,000. So you can see there's more $0 tax filers. There's about 3,100 of those in that scenario, but fewer people would get a rate impact because there would be more new $0 tax filers. And that's all for the impacts. This last slide here is just to tee up a discussion about the exemptions. So an exemption just means that if a business engages in a certain type of activity, they can carve that carve that income out of their B&O tax filing. It gets exempted. So I don't know if you all have the
Brandy,
handout.
one moment. I
Yeah,
think the
okay.
city manager, do you have a question or comment?
Yeah, just a comment. As Brandy works on to exemptions, the one thing I wanted to point out is that we modeled now going from $1 to $2 per thousand, but you can go other increments along the way. So you don't have to go all the way to 2/10. We model it so you could see the absolute impact, but you could go 0.0015, you can go 0.0016, and we can provide additional modeling if you want to see that. But generally, you can generally say if you went 0.0015, you just kind of have half the revenues that are shown here. So the 1.8 becomes 900,000 in new revenue is another way you can look at that. So I just wanted to point that out, that we can, as we get done with this conversation, if there's additional modeling as we get into the mid-year retreat that you'd like to see that would be helpful to the conversation, we want to take that feedback from you as well so we can continue around this conversation line. So sorry, Brandy.
Oh, great, thank you. Do you want the handout of exemptions? Okay. So I guess as those are going around the table, the points that we just wanted to draw out, Olympia already provides more exemptions than most of the cities that we compared ourselves to, and more than our model ordinance contains. So we already do a really good job on this front. And we can modify our exemptions. There are a couple that are mandatory, which we can't touch, and you'll see those. I think both of them are on page 2. And so the way to look at this exhibit is I've summarized all of the current exemptions in our OMC. And those, so every row is a different exemption. And I've provided a nice little blurb right out of the OMC for you in that second column. Sorry if I didn't print out enough of them, I apologize. Okay. So the wordy column, it just describes the exemption. And then the very first column with checks in it, that's the model code. So all of the cities that have a B&O tax in the state, they're required to operate under what we call our model code. We can deviate somewhat from it, but we all have to have the same starting point. And then Olympia is next, and it has a checkbox by all of our exemptions, and then all of the other cities that we pulled into the comparison are shown after that. So if there's no checkbox, then that city doesn't offer that exemption.
So Brandy, are these are the exemptions, are they incentives? Are they, what makes it, are they for specific needs that Olympia has that are different from other communities? Or why do we have so many compared to other jurisdictions?
I don't know. I don't know the history of, I guess we'd have to either ask somebody who has been here for many years with a long memory, or dig through old minutes. I don't know.
Yes, City Manager Bernie.
I'll just say that generally Brandy's right. Throughout the years, prior councils have made different decisions around different types of businesses to exempt. I mean, you'll see there that we exempt far more than a lot of other cities. And as Brandy has up there, we can modify exemptions. So we didn't look at that. We didn't model any of that. But I think it's just good information for you to have. And as we think forward again to mid-year retreat, especially around exemptions, if there's more information you want about impacts of this or that, or maybe trying to understand some more, we can model different things. So I just want to make sure you had that in front of you as you think about that. And I think as Brandy wraps up, I mean, I really think that's kind of the end of what we want to share with you now on B&O. So I just wanted to pause and see what additional questions you might have and or any additional information that might be helpful for you, for us to prepare in terms of modeling, different impacts.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
I didn't make notes on this, but there may be more of a technical answer for this. But the other day I went on a walk with Desiree from the ODA, and one of the things I wasn't aware of when I was talking about B&O is that the ODA does get the Olympia Downtown Alliance gets a tax refund through donations. So when, this may not be the correct way of explaining this, but when a small business downtown gives money to the ODA, there's a tax refund from their B&O. And so if their B&O was zeroed out on a lot of small businesses downtown, it may take a sizable chunk out of the Olympia Downtown Alliance. I spoke to Jay about this recently, and I asked her to go talk to her about this concern. So there may be other organizations in the city that get money back through revenue based on a tax exemption that they're receiving from the state. And so this is a thing that I may want us to look at when we go forward from here.
Yeah, and this is some of you may be familiar with the Main Street B&O tax credit. That's what this program is. And so Desiree's concern, and I'll talk to her more around this, is if the more zero filers you have, particularly in the downtown, if they're not paying, then there's no credit against, and it could take away from their Main Street B&O. And those businesses voluntarily pay into the Main Street B&O tax program. They have a rationale to do that. So it's just something we're going to want to explore further.
Councilmember Gilman, followed by Councilmember Madron.
So I just want to clarify that when we exempt a business, either changing our threshold or through an exemption, we're only exempting them from the municipal business and occupation tax. And the state business and occupation tax and any associated grant programs or anything remains in force, right?
Correct, yeah.
So, and I just want to briefly comment we had a robust conversation when we looked at this at Finance, and we have few opportunities for progressive rather than regressive taxes, and we've spent many years trying to encourage small business, and it was a pleasant surprise that we could get that at the $500,000 exemption, it's only $500,000 less revenue to the city to have 3,000 of our small enterprises filing zero. And it is an increase to 98 of the largest enterprises in the community. But I just wanted to underscore that was a bigger impact in zeroing out a larger number of businesses than I had anticipated, and less of an impact on the additional revenue that we would gain by going to the it's not 2%, it's 2/10 is what we'd call it, yeah, to the 2/10 tax. So I just wanted to underscore that.
Thank you. Councilmember Madron.
Yeah, one of the things that I'd like to see when this comes back to us in the retreat is the impacts that we see from state legislation. We'll know what makes it through by next week. So, just what the cumulative impact is from our scenarios in addition to whatever we see from the state. And I want to sit with these exemptions a little bit more to kind of read through them and digest them a bit. So I might follow up with an email with some questions. I mean, I'm noting like gross receipts of an international banking facility. That's one that popped out to me as maybe that's an exemption that we might consider getting rid of. There's others on here like boxing or wrestling matches where maybe we get rid of it and we don't see anything from it. But I also look at other cities' exemptions not in the OMC, and I see nonprofit childcare services. And so I want to sit down with this a little bit more and kind of explore, ask some more questions. Yeah.
Just one comment on that. Ours is actually broader. Ours is all nonprofit.
Oh, of course.
So those are
Okay.
cities that have like narrowed it a little bit. Just, I think that's one point.
I
you made,
see.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, why wouldn't we do that?
Yeah.
But we do. Okay. Thanks for that clarification. So this is something I want to sit with a little bit more. And Jay and Brandy, I can follow up with you with any additional questions I have. But we might consider, revisiting some of these exemptions and, saying that we, like I said, revisit them.
Yes, City Manager Bernie.
Thank you for that, because I think we'd love to hear that from all of you individually, if you've got things that just pique your interest on that exemption list, because we can start to look at and kind of model and see what those impacts mean. To your point, Councilmember Drone, one of them may not have any impact at all or very low impact, but we should understand that. And then the other point I wanted to make is my initial look at what the state did for their B&O is essentially they did what you're talking about here. They made the increase for businesses that pay B&O over 5 million, but left the current in place for businesses from 1 million up. So that's my initial look at it. They did something similar here to try to keep smaller businesses where they are and move the increase to the larger businesses. But I think Brandy had her hand up to add something to my comments.
Yeah, thank you. The estimates of impacts for new exemptions or existing exemptions, we won't have any way to measure that because we aren't getting any information from the current businesses. So just to set expectations a little bit.
Any additional questions? Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen, followed by Councilmember Vanderpool.
Brandy, could you repeat yourself? We won't have any way of measuring what? I want to make sure I caught that.
Yeah, for example, if you have an international banking facility that isn't reporting that income on our current B&O tax because they're exempted, we don't know how to quantify removing that exemption and making them pay. We don't know who they are or how much business they're doing because they aren't reporting it right now. That's what I was trying to say. Yeah.
Councilmember Vanderpool, followed by Councilmember Madrone.
Two items that I think of that I'd like to hear when this comes back will be, how much, if we can go even into the categories that we saw up there, of how much will each small business on average save from this if we zero it out, like realistically looking at how much it would save just per average small business based on their revenue, so that we have an idea of how much of positive influence this could have. And then the other question I have is, if we shift over, what do we do with the revenue at the end of the day? Does it go into the general fund? Does it go somewhere else? I'm always curious about where that fund will go.
City Manager Bernie has a response.
Yeah, so it will go to the general fund minus any conversation that you might want to have about dedicating any portion of it to some other, like, for example, we've talked a lot about in the past finding some dedicated revenues for Olympia Strong. And that might be a consideration that you want to look at as you bring this in. Is there a portion of it that you might want to allocate someplace else like that, and the rest go to the general fund? And so I think as we continue down this path of exploration, we can have that conversation with the council about your thoughts and ideas there.
Councilmember Madrone.
Yeah, I just had a follow-up for, if we have an exemption that we're exploring removing, that there's not data there to say how much we could potentially get from that. But they still pay into state B&O, right? So there's some information that we just don't have right now that we could access somehow, right?
I believe you're correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Unless the state has the same exemption, I don't know.
Okay,
They
yeah, so
could,
we could at
yeah.
least potentially approximate.
potentially, right.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Gilman.
Take Councilmember Vanderpool's question about what would it cost a small business. Thomas had a really good response for us when we talked about this before, which if it's $1 on 1,000, and if a business has $250,000 in revenue at their hot dog stand, they'd pay $250 a year.
Okay.
If they have twice that $500,000, it'd be $500. So we're not talking about changing people's lives, overnight, right? But I think it's an affirmative gesture to try to support those businesses. But the tax is not a huge tax.
Yeah.
But it's something.
Yes.
Some relief.
Yes.
Yes. Councilmember Cooper.
Well, I just wanted to add that when we talked about that in particular at finance, we talked about if we want to bring any kind of a proposal to the community, we need to have a really clear way for people to calculate, where they are now and where they would be in the future with the future rate. Like a little calculator tool or something so that people can see those numbers in real time.
City Manager Bernie.
Yeah, and the other, I think, consideration here too is as the council gets further along on this and, if you're start to hone in on a particular proposal, is to also spend some time out in our business community, kind of explaining it and getting a level of understanding. I think there can be a lot. This is a very complicated tool with different thresholds and different rates. And so I think it'd be really good to your point, Councilmember Cooper, to put some sort of tool together and then use that tool to go out and engage the business community a bit around impacts so we can make sure we have everything we need around decision making. And we'll plan for that.
Any additional questions? So I actually have one because I don't know how this works. I'm not understanding, why certain exemptions are in the code versus ones that are not. So can you explain that?
My understanding is when all of the cities decided to have a municipal B&O tax, they decided on 2 mandatory exemptions. One of them's for sale of liquor, one of them's for sale of fuel. I think because those 2 are taxed pretty heavily on the state side. And then they drafted a number of other exemptions. I gave out all my copies, but there's, half a dozen others. And beyond that, over time, the city of Olympia has decided to draft additional exemptions for whatever reason. Was that your question? Yeah.
It is my question. I guess I'm just trying to fully understand, is the idea that the ones that aren't in code would sunset at some point, or they're easier to, I guess, eliminate because they're not in code? I guess I'm just trying to understand how they're placed and why. Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know that we'll give you a very complete answer to this, other than that those that are part of the model ordinance, we can't change, right? So, and there was decisions made at a state level around what those are. Everything that's outside of that is discretionary to the city and to the council for what you will offer. And I think over time, different councils for different reasons exempted various businesses, classifications of businesses from the list. Sorry, yeah, and unexempted too, across time. So you see the exemptions list, but what you also don't have is your history of what was once exempt that isn't exempted anymore, right? So I guess the short answer to this question is everything outside of the model ordinance is discretionary for the council to have a conversation about if you want to continue those exemptions or not. And I think that, we'll do our best, I think, to answer specific questions about specific groups, but Brandy's right, we may not be able to give a complete answer because some of us weren't here when those decisions were made.
Okay, that makes sense. And then also the context of we're preempted by the state and our code is just reinforcing what the state says is the law. Okay, that makes sense. Thank you. Councilmember Vanderpool.
Just a quick thing, based on the conversation. It says motor fuel and liquor as the mandatory required exemptions. I notice Puyallup doesn't have that.
That's
Did they do
probably
something special?
just an error on my part.
Okay,
They
I-
have to have that,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay,
I can check.
Okay, thank you.
Any additional questions on exemptions before we move on? All right, seeing none.
Okay, we are going to move on to Silvana, Interim Parks Director Silvana Niehauser, who's going to walk us through, and Silvana, I will advance your slides for you because I know she's remoting in, I should say that out loud. That's why you don't see her at the table. So there'll be a voiceover that you'll hear in the background. It'll be Silvana, and I'll advance her slides. We've had a lot of questions from council, especially the newer council members. There's lots of funding components around our parks funding. I mean, most of us are pretty familiar with Olympia Municipal Parks District and OMPD funding, but there's voted utility taxes and non-voted utility taxes that are part of an interlocal agreement, some of which have sunset clauses. And so we shared this presentation with the Finance Committee and thought it would be also great to share with the rest of the council to kind of talk about all the different components, see what questions you have, and then talk about one particular set of funding that does sunset this year that is available to you in 2026. So Silvana, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you well. Can you hear me?
Yep, we got you. So go ahead and let me know and I'll advance your slides wherever you need them to be.
All right, great. Thank you. Good evening, Mr. Mayor and council members. For the record, I'm Silvana Niehauser, the Interim Parks, Arts, and Recreation Director, and I'm here tonight to provide information on our Metropolitan Parks District interlocal agreement with the city and what funding is called out in this agreement. Next. So in 2004, we had a voted measure that we refer to as the VUT, the voted utility tax. And that gives us 2% of the tax that's collected, and 1% goes to sidewalks and pathways. In 2016, our Parks Plan process identified the need for a Metropolitan Parks District. Between 2004 and 2016, we faced a recession. The whole city was impacted. And with parks, our staffing levels decreased quite significantly. And we ended up, just to be able to preserve some of our maintenance and operations positions, moving some of that voted utility tax over to cover maintenance. And in that process, what we found later from some of our park advocates and working with the community is that the way that the ballot measure was interpreted was that the voted utility tax would be utilized to acquire properties, develop them, and then maintain those properties. And so we when we started identifying how we were going to roll out the Metropolitan Parks District, one of the key things was that we make sure that the funding in the Metropolitan Parks District covered, the ballot measure covered four main things. We had maintenance, acquisition, development, and safety, park safety. So that was the Ranger program. And what we did is when that passed and we started collecting money on it, we moved the voted utility tax back out of operations and put it into acquisition. And so because of that, what had happened with the voted utility tax, the advocates really strongly wanted to have an interlocal agreement that would spell out where the funds are supposed to go to, and that makes sure that when they're voting for a measure and that it is going to continue to go the way that they had anticipated. So we were very pleased that the ballot measure had passed in 2015 with 56% of the voter support. And then in 2016, the city and the board entered into that interlocal agreement, and our Parks advocates were a really big part of helping us form that interlocal agreement. And the ILA, or the interlocal agreement, directed the creation of the advisory committee. And the advisory committee's purpose is to oversee the compliance, the city's compliance with that interlocal agreement. Um, Next slide. So with these funding sources, we have incorporated into our Parks, Arts, and Recreation Plan our capital investment strategy that lays out how those funds are going to be utilized over the near term, which is our 6-year planning horizon, but then we also call out our long range options as our long range planning as well. Those are less dialed in, but we do specify those. Our Parks, Arts, and Recreation Plan prioritizes based on public input and public need. So we spend a good year of public engagement, and we do it in a variety of methods so that we can hear from a representation of our community. And we utilize all that information to then update our plan and update the priorities. Next slide. Oh, I did forget to mention that our current parks plan was adopted in 2022, and next year we're going to start working on our next update, and then in 2027 there will be a heavy focus on public engagement, and it'll come before council in early 2028 for the final adoption. So the funding commitments that are laid out in the interlocal agreement include 11% of the city's general fund. And I will cover how that came about, or where the 11% came about, in the future slide here. And then the 2% voted utility tax revenues that I talked about earlier from that 2004 voted measure. And really the focus is on land acquisition and to maintain and develop those properties. And right now, we currently have $1 million committed to debt service payments on a $16 million land acquisition package that included the LBA Woods and Yelm Highway Community Park, and I believe Kaiser Woods as well, which those are some pretty large properties. Right now, we currently are using $470,000 of that voted utility tax to support the maintenance operations of those parks, and we track that each year. And our most recent numbers, I just updated this a couple months ago, is that we're spending about $590,000 a year to maintain those properties, and we really only transfer what we need. So it's either going to be equal to or less than the amount that it costs to maintain those properties. And we utilize a work order management system to track the costs for those parks. Next slide. So there's also 2.5% of non-voted utility tax revenue that we get. And I know that sounds a little confusing, but instead of lumping it together, I think it's important to separate it because they have different sunset dates for parks, not for the collection of them, but just for their allocation to parks. So the first one that you'll see at the top of your screen there, sunsets at the end of 2029. And so that's been going into a fund for parkland acquisition. And then the second 0.5% there sunsets at the end of this year. And if council doesn't do anything, it'll go back to the general fund. If council wanted to decide to keep that with parks, there would need to be an action to do that. We're not counting on that money moving forward because what we count for our revenues is what is allocated to us in the agreement. So beyond this year, we're not counting on that revenue. Next slide. So when I mentioned the 11% of the general fund and how we came about that, in 2015, our park advocates in the city analyzed the 2015 budget and the percentage that was going to Parks, Arts, and Recreation as opposed to the other departments. And it was, I believe it was 10.7%, and so it was rounded to 11%. And so what the park advocates wanted to make sure is that when the Metropolitan Park District funding came in, that the general fund money wouldn't be removed and that it would just be like a replacement, but that instead the MPD would allow parks to continue to grow. So that's where the 11% was based off of the 2015 budget. So as the city's general fund increases, the dollar amount will also increase, but not the percentage, if that makes sense. But also if the city's general fund decreased, then the parks portion would, the dollars would decrease, but it would still stay at 11%. Next slide. So we've, for the last 10 years, we've really had predictable, reliable funding, and I would even say for the last 21 years since the voted utility tax. But we have been able to do a lot. In the last 10 years, we've had very fast-paced growth. We've expanded our outdoor recreation programs. We restored our programs such as our trail crew and our landscape crew that were cut during the 2008 recession. We started a full-fledged ranger program and have 2 dedicated stewardship staff. We dedicate almost $1 million to major maintenance and ADA. We also have acquired over 500 acres since 2004. And we, every year we have inspections of Percival Landing and do repairs. And then we also had renovated a portion of Percival Landing. So we've been able to do quite a bit with that funding. Next slide. We also opened 3 dog parks, and we have several cultural events that are supported through our cultural events program. And then we opened 2 spray grounds, and we have our seasonal ice rink, Oleon Ice, and we received the armory from the state, and we are continuing to work towards opening on that. Next slide. So we also have been working on 2 major projects with this predictable and reliable funding, which is the development of the Yelm Highway Community Park Phase 1 and the renovations of the Armory Creative Campus. That's the critical improvements for life safety to meet code. And the funding, as it's outlined, has allowed us to move those projects to the point where now we're ready for construction. And on June 10th, we're going to come before the council with a debt proposal package. And without the interlocal agreement, I just want to point out that we wouldn't be able to do this debt finance package. So just to keep that in mind, that all of the planned development that we've had or that we're planning in the future, you know, including Yelm Highway and the Armory, is based on our revenue sources. So if anything were to change drastically with our revenue, that would also change our future plans. So because they're tied in. And that is all.
Thank you, Silvana. Any questions or comments from council? Councilmember Gilman.
Hi, Silvana. Oh, there you are. Hi. Hi. Could you speak to the VUT was the Parks and Pathways measure, and at least in the Parks Plan before this one, we still called out neighborhood pathways having annual funding, and that there was a sidewalk construction component of that voted utility tax. Can you tell me how that part of the money works?
Yeah, so we've been transferring 25,000 every year to transportation for pathways to parks. And they are currently working on a pathway in the West Olympia neighborhood that is adjacent to Garfield Elementary School and between Woodruff Park and the school. So they utilize that funding for pathways that, will bring people to the parks, or in this case, through the parks as well.
Thank you, Silvana.
Any additional questions or comments for Silvana? All right. So Silvana, you said that the non-voted utility tax is money, I guess, that you're not relying upon. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out, well, then, why do we have it as a non-voted utility tax?
Well, we currently rely on it, but because in the interlocal agreement, there's those sunset dates, we're not planning on utilizing the second half, which is about
Oh, I see.
500,000 a year.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
That
so
wasn't
we're-
clear. Sorry, I was like.
I'm sorry.
Sorry. I'm like, why do we have it if we're not relying on it?
No,
okay.
we use it towards acquisition, so.
Yeah, okay.
But, yeah, we just know the state of the general fund, and so, and we know that if council doesn't take an action, that'll go back to the general
Sure.
fund, and this is what Jay has shared, that he recommends that it go back towards the general fund. So for 2026, it's not in our budget.
Okay. And priority-based budgeting should help us figure out what to do with that.
Yes.
Thank you. City Manager Bernie.
Yeah, thank you. And just to clarify on the voted, again, goes back to the 2004 measure. The non-voted portion of that is off private utilities. So it's off our private utilities, so things like cable, telephone. And they set them up as additional funds back when the interlocal was agreed upon to help get us farther along with our acquisition. But there was always an intention over time that 1%, which is broken into 0.5%, would come back to the general fund over time, that it wasn't needed for parks long-term. So this coming back at the end of 2025 into 2026 was expected, which is why Silvana said, absent another action, it's automatic that it comes back unless you take a different action.
All right. Additional questions or comments for Silvana? Seeing none. All right. Thank you, Silvana.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Thanks, Silvana. Okay. One of the things that we discussed in January is we wanted to monitor and discuss some other factors which may impact our budget balancing for 2026, including waiting to see what comes out of this year's legislative session, a waiting on a Supreme Court ruling on public defense standards, and one I added here, any impacts to our federal funding. At the state level, the conversation and bills proposed to raise the 1% property tax cap did not move forward. So they got, again, kind of several years in a row, they've gotten fairly close, but didn't make it across the finish line. On the good news front, there is some renewals to our right-of-way funding that's coming through the state that helps support our permanent supportive housing projects. The Regional Housing Council tech team are working through those allocations, but I generally expect all of our sites to be funded, with the exception of Plum Street Village, which we are closing as part of the sale of 900 Plum Street and working through that transition. There is also a bill headed to the governor that provides some public safety funding if signed. House Bill 2015 offers both a grant program for hiring new officers and an optional additional 1% public safety sales tax that is councilmanic. Like most of those options, the county would get the right to enact that 1% first, and if they don't by a date certain, then it would be up to the cities to enact if we chose to. And we're working through all that as this legislation moves forward about those dates and how that would work out. We may be able to take advantage of the grant in 2026, but in terms of timing and any conversation around the additional 1% public safety sales tax, I don't believe that will help us until probably 2027 budget. I think once the governor signs the bill, it's got to go through rulemaking. They got to decide how they're going to offer the grant program. I expect that to be into 2026 before the grant program is live. And then we have to take advantage of that grant program before we're eligible on the 1%. And the other condition that's tied to this too is that law enforcement agencies that are seeking this funding need to be current on their state mandated training, which we are at this point in time. So that's good news for us. So there's just a few pieces of this. So once it gets signed by the governor, I do expect it's going to be signed by the governor. And once we see that, then we'll work through the kind of timelines and kind of circle back with you on how this, and I'll be talking more with the chief about what this could look like for us and potential timelines.
Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. Just a question on that last bit, Jay, if the county did it, is there a portion to the local governments like the one that was just passed at the ballot box a year or two ago?
Correct. So if
Okay.
the county does it, then we'd get our portion just like we did this last go around.
So if the county should happen to become compliant before the deadline and they did it, we would still get some revenue for
We
public
would.
safety?
We would.
It's my sense that they have a ways to go, though.
Yeah, I can't comment there, but yeah.
Councilmember Madrone.
I'm trying to remember all the revenue bills that made it through. I know that Senator Bateman had one on sales tax and storage facilities. I don't remember if that one made it through. I also had a constituent flag for me that there's a sales tax on IT services that is, awaiting signature. And the comment that they made to me is like, so long as the state didn't exempt themselves from paying that sales tax,
Yeah.
that there could be a good chunk of revenue in terms of IT services that the state needs. There might be a couple other things to dig into. And again, we'll know more next week once we see what comes out of the, final round of signatures. But I think we could dig a little bit deeper
Yeah.
to see what other opportunities are coming out of the state.
Yeah, thank you for that. And we'll do that homework too with our lobbyists as we get through and see what comes out of final signing. Then we'll square up what this all looks like. Hopefully by the time we get to your June mid-year retreat, we can give you another update here.
Councilmember Gilman.
I just wanted to double check. The public safety sales tax, I understood was 1/10 of 1% rather than 1%.
Sorry, 1/10 of
My heart was
1%.
thumping. I was like,
1/10 of 1%. So I'm sorry if I
Thank
said that wrong. That would get your heart thumping.
Yeah, thank you. Great. Just wanted to double check.
Yeah. Okay, and then just continually, as council is aware, we included in our 2025 budget, in anticipation of a Supreme Court ruling on public defense standards, we included $500,000 in our current 2025 budget. They've yet to rule, but as we head towards mid-year, there may be some savings there as we get to mid-year for this year. And ultimately, if they do not make the rule change, depending on what happens there, there is a possibility of about $500,000 in capacity. And at this point in time, I just don't have a sense of when they're going to rule. A couple of deadlines have passed for when they were talking about it, but we'll continue to monitor this and right along with you. And as soon as we hear, then they'll kind of give us a path forward. And then, as council is aware, President Trump signed an executive order threatening the withholding of federal funding for sanctuary cities. Just today, I learned that the state of Washington signed on to help fight that order with other states. We were kind of waiting to hope that would happen. It did happen today, so just grateful for that. I did circulate some information to the council last week outlining potential impacts. I'd asked the department directors to really dig deep and kind of take that spreadsheet that you saw and narrow it down by department to kind of give you a little bit better sense of what's there. Of significance is funding for current and future public works projects, which if you just look out to 2026 is about $11.9 million for projects this year and next year. I do want to state that we are worried about clawbacks in terms of Phones Road funding. I have talked to Mark. He assures me that we can complete that project, but if we lose that funding at the federal level, it's going to significantly impact the out-year projects. So it's important for you to know that. There's a solar grant for the Armory that's there, we're monitoring. And then CDBG is probably the other program that could take a big hit here. Our allocation annually is about $347,000. As council knows, that money goes out to a lot of nonprofits in our communities that are doing great work. There's also $160,000 in CDBG funds that are already obligated. So again, as we think about clawbacks, there's impacts there for dollars that aren't spent yet. So we're paying attention to that. And then another significant item is GEMT funding for our BLS program that we stood up. So, which is federal funding that offers supplemental payments to Medicare and Medicaid. So we bill Medicare and Medicaid, and there's supplemental payments, and they're reimbursable. So we won't see a big chunk of GEMT this year. As we finish out the year and we submit reimbursements, that's money that comes in starting really next year. We'll start to see that. That could be anywhere from $2 to $4 million, as I talk to the chief, in potential lost revenue if that gets pulled back. So that's probably, of all the things here around just our operating budget, is significant based on programs that we have. Again, we have not been provided anything yet, anything in writing that any of our funding is being withheld. But I thought I would provide it tonight just in terms of awareness for us in the community that there definitely is some impacts here that we might have to work through. So any questions here before we move on to priority-based budgeting?
I guess just project-specific Plan Bs. So for example, with Phones Road, that's already underway. So if we know there's a potential for funding to be at risk, I guess I'm asking about, you know, are we preparing for how we need to pivot on those projects?
We are, and I don't know, Mark, if you want to come up and talk about that at all, because Mike could probably give you an idea of specific projects. So the short answer, as Mark walks up here, is there is enough money in the transportation budget to complete Phones Road, but not without impact in the out years to other projects. I think Mark can probably talk better to that.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. For the record, I'm Mark Russell, Public Works Director. We do have enough, if they pull, there's $9.5 million on Phones Road. It's our biggest project we've done in a while and our biggest federal funding all in one project. So if that were to be lost, we would delay or stop probably all other transportation projects until the revenues were to be replenished. And so my guess is that would be, you know, a couple of years worth of projects would be delayed. It just depends on how fast and when this were to happen. And so we didn't go through and say this project and this project, because with that amount of money, we would not be able to, it would take all our fund balances and all those different programs in order to fund Phones Road. But we would have to do that. We couldn't stop a project mid-construction. You've probably been out on Phones Road, and we can't leave it the way it is. And we have contractual commitments with vendors and contractors and things like that. So, but we're fortunate enough with the projects we have planned over the next 2 to 4 years that we would have, because we save a lot of money before we build a project, so we would be able to use our local funds to finish Phones, and then we would have to slow down or delay all the other projects until those funds are replenished. So does that answer your question, Mayor, as far as, we don't have specifically which projects. Just in doing a look at this, you know, would affect all projects for the first year or two, at least until Phones Road is done. Because if you remember, Phones Road's going to go through next construction season, through the 2026 construction season. So we'd need to get through that, and then we could start to look at how quickly we could start up some of those other projects.
Sure, that helps, Mark. Thank you. I just kind of wanted you to paint the picture a little bit for anybody who's paying attention. It could be a little scary to just mention that we could be impacted but not see what the future looks like. So that's very clear that, you know, that's what would happen. So thank you. Councilmember Vanderpool.
So before I was on council voted for some of the transportation dollars to go particularly to active transportation projects. Not all of Phones Road is active transportation, from what I remember. There is portions of it that are, but some of it is still repaving and redesigning car lanes. So I'm very curious about how we square that difference.
We'd probably have to make some difficult decisions as a city and as a council. We would try to use all our reserves in all other kinds of money, including the regular transportation benefit district, the real estate excise tax dollars, our impact fees. My my approach would be, I guess I certainly didn't play this scenario out to that detail, but we would use all the fund balance we have in all those other programs first. And then if we had to get into the voted utility tax and the transportation benefit district sales tax that council has asked us to use just on pedestrian and bike facilities, we would need to come back to the council and make sure you're okay with that. But we would be in a situation where we wouldn't have a lot of choice. I think we'll be really close. We're already putting $3 million of that kind of money toward Phones Road because there's at least $3 million worth of pedestrian and bicycle related improvements. But if we needed to put more than that toward Phones Road, we'd need to obviously have a conversation with the council on that particular topic to make sure. But my approach would be to use everything else first and then come to you if we had to, for a special circumstance, which I think the ordinance allowed us to do, to come back to council for a special circumstance. And I think this would qualify as one to get your approval to use those funds that are reserved for pedestrian and bike facilities.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Gilman.
Just as Mark was just explaining, I believe, and Councilmember Madrone can confirm, that what we finally agreed to as council was that rather than us coming and asking to use transportation money for multimodal for that additional 0.1%, that instead we would initially plan for it to be used for active transportation or multimodal projects, but that Mark and Sophie could come to us and say, hey, we have a need where we need to use the fund in a different way. Or as Councilmember Cooper was saying, when we reach exigent circumstances like the faucets turned off from the federal funding, then we have a conversation. So we didn't, anyhow, that was my understanding of the agreement we reached, was it wasn't a forever promise of 11% to go to sidewalks or anything like that. It was, yeah, so.
Councilmember Madrone.
Yeah, I understand that it's something that we need to revisit in 10 years anyway. And just to tie a bow on all that, like for the Transportation Benefit District sales tax, it is also for standalone projects. So when you say there's already $3 million in multimodal pedestrian bicycle stuff, that's coming from the voted utility tax, correct?
That's correct. We didn't have the sales tax when we paid
Yeah.
the funding package for phones, so my apologies if I mixed those two together.
Oh, no, you didn't. I'm just trying to make sure it's crystal clear for anybody who's watching, who closely watches how we spend these dollars, to make sure that, we have not run amok on the TBD sales tax.
We have not. We have not. Yep. And I'm giving you a worst case scenario. I guess I'm somewhat like Jay on this particular scenario. I'm a glass half full. So those funds are already obligated. They're being spent as we speak. So I'm really hopeful that we'll be further along before anything negative from the federal government could happen. So, but I need to give you the worst case scenario if it were to. So.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Back to you, City Manager Burney.
Yeah, I just wanted to offer an opportunity for Chief Morris to come up and talk about GMT a little bit. I think I gave you an explanation, but he might give you a better one in terms of those impacts.
While he's on his way up, can you tell me what GEMT stands for?
There you go. I'm gonna let this guy talk about all that.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. For the record, Matt Morris, Fire Chief. GMT is Ground Emergency Medical Transport. And so it's a federal program for reimbursing the cost of transports for Medicare and Medicaid recipients. They capped what they pay when we bill a Medicare transport. It's a limited payment, and so then at the end of the year, you can submit for reimbursement for the difference between what it actually costs to provide the service to the Medicare Medicaid payment. It's a federal government it's a federal program that's available to only public entities. So private entities, private businesses are not eligible for GMT. And so that's the intent in the program, is to help municipalities, local governments offset the cost of providing transport.
Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. Chief, can you clarify if that is being eliminated in the current continuing resolution, or is that part of the skinny budget from the current administration that came out recently?
There has not been any indication that GMT is at risk. What's at risk is Medicaid. And
So if you cut Medicaid, then you cut reimbursements and it trickles, okay, I got you. And
yeah.
hospitals close and all kinds of things
Correct,
happen, which they
correct,
cut. I'm just gonna say this now since I have the microphone. The continuing CR not only gives the executive power to take nonprofit status away at will, it cuts $800 billion from Medicare.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for that, because, we're talking about impact here in our revenues. The impact to cuts to Medicaid are catastrophic across the country in terms of what it means to real people, so.
I can share in addition that the payer mix that we've recognized for our transport services is in excess of 60% Medicaid, Medicare related billing, which is much higher than most communities. Most communities you see about 35 or 40% of your billing is Medicaid, Medicare. We're above 60 month in, month out. So while that is an indication of an anticipation of what GMT could potentially be, it also speaks to why you see the revenues today being lower than what was anticipated. We were predicting a 35 to 40% recovery on ambulance billing, non-Medicaid, non-Medicare ambulance billing. But that's such a small percentage of our billing. The greater percentage is becoming Medicaid, Medicare. And so it's kind of just shifted that way. With it, assuming, I'm going to go on about the assumption that GMT will stay intact, that reimbursement through the GMT should be a significant opportunity. Thank you.
Additional questions or comments? All right. Thanks, Chief.
Thanks, Chief. Okay, and finally tonight, before we talk about a little look forward to your June retreat, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant City Manager Debbie Sullivan to kind of give you an update on our progress moving to priority-based budgeting. Debbie's going to talk about the moment in time we are here, and then what we're going to have for you as we get into June and kind of throughout the year.
Thank you, Jay. Again, for the record, Debbie Sullivan, Assistant City Manager, and we have been on the journey of priority-based budgeting since the beginning of the year. And before I start my presentation, I want to do a very large shout out to a number of people. 60 of them sat in this room and received the training about this journey to do priority-based budgeting, and they've been on this journey with us all throughout. And it is quite an effort to do it. And why priority-based budgeting? And really it is about what I say storytelling to help the community and help you understand what it is we do, how we do it, and how much it costs to provide those services. Because it transforms our line item budget into programs. And we can align those programs with our comprehensive plan and the commitment that we've made to our community about advancing their vision. So this slide up here really talks about our journey. It's a very simple slide, but it's really a windy journey. It starts with loading our line item data from our budget book and putting it into a software program that helps us organize it by a program inventory, do program costing, and we're doing scoring right now. I'll talk a bit more about what that means. And then at the end of the day, you will have a final report, what they call an opportunity area report, that shows you information on program cost, impact, outcome. So that is what that is. A little bit about the journey. I shared this with Finance Committee. It started with a program inventory. And really, the program inventory, it sounds easy, but it is not. It is taking a group of tasks and aligning them around a purpose and an intent of why we produce that program. And so we have two types of programs. One is community. Those are external services that the community sees every single day. And then we have what we call governance programs, and those are internal services and programs that help support those external programs, and both are very, very important to do. This work is done. So that perhaps good, check mark on number one. So then the next one is around program cost allocation. We separate the personnel and the non-personnel costs, and we align those to the programs. The interesting thing about programs is programs can be citywide. okay? You can have one program and many resources touch that program. So that is the beauty of priority-based budgeting, is we'll be able to look up the cost of a program and be able to see both the personnel and non-personnel costs in one place across departments. And so that is really great to do. We can also connect cost recovery dollars to the programs. So think of things like fees for service, permit fees, recreation fees. You'll be able to see how much we are recovering costs for that. We're also able to connect our dedicated revenue to programs and services. So there you can think about OMPD revenue, the percentage of public safety tax dollars, and we can associate those with the programs that are being provided with that. And think about utility revenue. So we'll be able to see all of that. That work is done. We're doing a final scrub of those numbers, and I just want to give a big shout out to Joan. Loves this project, looking through all of the revenue. And yeah. And it kind of makes your head hurt when you think about this. Well, how much time? Is that an hour a week? You know, is that 2 hours a week? So anyway, just a big shout out again to all of the staff who have put time and energy into this. What we're doing right now, as we speak, is the program scoring. So there are two areas of program scoring. One is alignment. How does the programs support our efforts to advance our comprehensive plan? So we have divided our comprehensive plan into 6 focus areas: public safety, community livability, economy, environmental stewardship, well-planned city, and organizational excellence. So people are scoring those about how well they align. I will tell you that every one of our programs aligns with the focus area. There is no question there. We aren't doing anything outside of those focus areas, and so that is terrific. The other thing we're doing is then doing a score around what ResourceX refers to as program attributes. So reliance. Are we the only ones, are we the sole provider? Or are we the only ones providing the service? Can others do this service? Is it mandated? Is it a self-mandate by ordinance? Is it a state mandate, or is it a federal mandate? Cost recovery, I already explained what that is. Demand. What is the demand for this service? Is it going down? Is it staying flat, or is it increasing? And then population served. What is the percentage of the population served? When you think about an external program, that population is our city employees, right? So think of IT services. That is their population. Yeah.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
So when we're looking at population served, are we talking about also future tense?
That would be demand.
So I'm just thinking of, so we're looking at the population served now, but what about the population served 10 years from now? So if we're looking at housing, for example.
Yeah, that is an excellent question. My guidance would be to put that under demand. Is the demand increasing? So I'd probably say scored the demand higher.
Okay.
But the population served is about what we are doing right now.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Debbie?
then, yeah.
Just a quick question. Are you saying that the software can determine what the demand is?
No.
Oh, okay.
No.
I'm like, how would it know that?
No, the people who have the program, they're the ones making that determination.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
And then the program, based on the inputs, will provide a report that breaks it down in this way so that we'll be able to see it.
Yeah. We added 2 attributes outside of the software program, and that is around climate and equity. And those are the lenses that we look through all of our programs through to ensure that we have a climate lens and an equity lens. So those are 2 additional attributes that all of the programs are being scored against. So our peer review team, so departments, they scored it. Then we have a peer review team that is cross-departmental. We started that process today. I will tell you, we have 161 programs and 11 attributes per program to review. So we're kind of, I might be rethinking how we do this peer review because it could take a very long time. But yeah, we're at work on it. I just want to give you a sneak peek. The future slides, I'm going to show you some numbers. Please do not think that these are the final numbers because these are early days. But this is how you would see the Parks, Arts, and Recreation budget in our budget book around the lines of business. We pulled these reports out of the software, and now you will see programs by Parks and Trails Maintenance, Recreation Activities, the Olympia Center, and the list goes on. I don't have all of them here, so it's kind of a sneak peek of what you will see in the future. The other thing that you can do is you can take a look. You'll have the total cost of the Parks and Trails Maintenance Program, for example, and you'll be able to see the personnel costs, the non-personnel costs, and the revenue that goes to support that program. Then you can dig down a little bit further and you can see in the middle, like the positions, what the job classifications are and their percentage of time that goes towards that program, so you can kind of dig in there. And you can see at the very top, there's a summary of, the total cost, the personnel, the non-personnel, the revenue, and the FTE count of 15.36. So those are the types of information that we'll be able to dig down into the program. And this now is looking at the non-personnel costs, so you can see contributions, the sidewalk utility tax, et cetera, machinery and equipment. I want to talk a little bit about next steps. So all of our data will be finalized and delivered to the consultant by the end of the month. They will take that and start coming up with the reports. At your mid-year retreat, we will have draft results on the program's costing and revenue. We'll have draft alignment to focus areas, and then, see, everything's draft, insights and recommendations. So you'll kind of get I wouldn't say a sneak peek, but it won't be completely vetted at that time, but you'll be able to kind of see where we are at that moment in time. And then on June 24th, the consultant is coming to the study session, and they will have the final report and the insights and recommendations. So that's where we are. Any questions?
Wow, thank you, Debbie. Councilmember Green.
Super exciting. That's a really tight window between mid-year retreat and final. What are the types of edits that could feasibly happen in that window?
That is one of the things I want to say, and the consultant has said to me over and over again, this is a living process. There's nothing cast in stone. So you could take a look at it and say, I want to understand more about something, and we can make those tweaks in it. I think the real difference between the mid-year retreat and June 24th is I'm talking on June 13th, and the consultant is talking on June 24th. Yeah.
Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
Oh, this is so exciting. I really appreciate your presentation and being able to see this moment in time. Could you, I was really intrigued by a slide that sort of showed like how we were measuring things, what the metrics were. And so, City Manager Bernie's on it. So what is the sort of rhythm with priority-based budgeting? How often are we sort of reassessing those measures? I mean, we do our budget, so every time we look at our budget, we look at those things. But what is the sort of the care and maintenance of it?
Thank you for that question. We haven't completely ironed it out. I've talked to the consultant about, what is the next step for priority-based budgeting. What I hear back is the first year is the hardest year. So I'll give you an example. We could have programs, let's just say take recreation activities, and we do it that way, $2.6 million in 2025, and we say, well, really what we want to see is what are the recreation activities for this audience? We can go through and kind of unpack what some of those things are. I think the rhythm may be, we finalize the 2026 budget, we re-upload the budget, and we ask department directors to go in and kind of reassess. It's not going to be the lift that it was this year. Yeah. This is the hard year. I just want to say, we are learning a lot, and there is nothing cast in the software that we can't change. So whether it's a scoring or an alignment or a cost allocation, we can go in and make those changes.
I just have just some quick questions there. So the folks operating the software, that will be in-house. So we're not relying too heavily on a contractor as we adopt priority-based budgeting. Is that correct?
That's right. We can do that. Now, there is a maintenance fee for having the software, and we haven't worked out those details. And they would continue to serve as a subject matter expert or a resource for us to consult with, but we can make the changes within the software between Joan's team and, yeah.
Okay. And then could we just quickly go to, this is my last question is, could we quickly go to the slide where it's talking about, yes, this one right here. So let's see. We'll just look at supervisor three, right? The second to the top. And so the allocation is 20%. And then to the right of that is 31,000 and some dollars. So is that for the 20%? Oh my gosh, it's really that granular.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And I'm sorry I didn't show you a program that had citywide, because you would be able to see which positions from across the city are allocated to different programs. Yeah.
Okay, additional questions?
I saw two down there.
Uh-huh. Okay, Councilmember Green, followed by Councilmember Cooper, followed by Councilmember Madrone, and Councilmember Vanderpool.
All right, Debbie, you're going to have to help me with what I'm trying to get at with this question. As you've gone through this process with your team, and they have been, well, all the staff who've been going through it, and they've been assigning the attributes, doing that, are folks starting to see things differently just from the process of doing this? Have there been any like ahas, or I've never thought of it this ways, or do you feel like the end result is what's going to help folks see that differently?
I think it'd be good to have a department director talk about their experience. What my experience is that there's so much value in the conversation itself, them talking about what programs there are, how they support each other. I don't know if they've had any ahas. I think some of, yeah.
I mean, I think the hardest thing, as I've talked to Debbie and talked to some of the directors, is scoring and trying to be honest about how you really think you impact something or don't. And that is a tough conversation. And that's why there's a peer review. So we can really look at that and then go back and talk and have a conversation with each other about, does this really impact this attribute or this focus area the way that we think it does? And it's hard. It's hard work for them. They're all doing amazing work, as you know, and trying to say, well, maybe I'm really a 3 here, not a 4 here. It's subjective. And so I think we'll get to some of that with peer review, but I would imagine that has been some of the hardest work.
Okay, Councilmember Cooper, followed by Councilmember Madrone.
Well, mine is shorter now because Councilmember Green stole my question. I was going to ask Debbie what her biggest aha is. So at the retreat, it'd be great to know some of the department heads' biggest ahas, like just to plant that. I am excited to nerd out on the final product. It looks really fascinating. And then just one thought I had while I was looking at it in the slides, where you were showing the blue lines. It would be cool if there's revenue. So the example I zoomed in on was the ice rink. You could see how much it costs. But if there was a green line on top of it that showed how much of it was filled by revenue on the same slide, then you would see the gap. So like go back one more.
Yeah.
So like the Ole ice rink costs 488, but there might be a green line that's 400 or whatever that is in sponsorships and fees for that project. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. I haven't seen the final report, but I'm confident that you'll be able to see that all in one place.
Okay.
And the other thing I want to say about the aha moments regarding the scoring, I think a lot of it is all us understanding what the definition is of the scoring and all getting on the same page. Once we are all on the same page about how to apply it, I think this will be easy to do. So I will say this timeline is aggressive to be able to do something this large and this much of a change management. And again, the department directors and all of their staff, they are in it, they're leaning into it, and we'll get there. Yeah.
Just on that point real quick, I mean, I appreciate the question about between June 13th and June 24th, and here's what I've told Debbie. That's our goal, is to bring you the next update June 24th. But if we're not ready on June 24th, then we'll move that to where we are ready. We do need to stay on a fairly aggressive schedule so that we can include this and implement this as part of our 2026 budget process, right? So we can't stray too far away from a kind of a June, July-ish schedule, because the departments are going to start inputting their budgets, and that work is going to get underway.
Councilmember Madrone, followed by Councilmember Vanderpool.
Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. Debbie, you said just right now, like all of us getting on the same page with the scoring. Did you mean like the internal team working on this, or like all of us?
The internal team.
Okay. And the reason I ask is because, there's also a process of helping the public understanding what we're doing. And so I'm really excited about all of this, even this preliminary, like little taste of what you're working on. What I see is something that the public can relate to a lot more than a big book with numbers in it. And so I'm really excited about this. And, maybe it'll be more clear come the retreat in June, but we just talked about potential revenue. We don't know what that full picture looks like yet. Especially not knowing what is going to happen with some bills at the state. But I'm thinking we're still going to need to be making reductions in our budget, and so connecting this into our budget process, I wonder if we're ready yet to speak to like how this translates to helping us make decisions in terms of reductions we may need to make for the 2026 budget.
I'll say a couple of things, and we'll talk about that a bit, about capacity and reductions in the next slide. We didn't enter the priority-based budget conversation as a way to find budget reductions, right? We entered this conversation to have a more transparent way of talking to our community about how we budget and where the money goes, and kind of storytelling. A byproduct of this final report will be a few things. One, they might suggest some revenue alternatives we hadn't considered. So they may show us maybe how other cities have paid for a certain program that maybe we haven't explored yet. I'm hoping that maybe there's some low-hanging fruit there that we can talk about for 2026. It's likely there'll be some other items that'll come out of that may take longer for us to work through. It might be future budgets. But you also get a look on, I think Debbie showed you this before, the way they break it out and break out some of our programs. They'll show you, for example, programs that have high costs but also have high impact on the community. They might also show you programs that have high costs that are low impact to the community. So it will point you generally in some directions of things to look at that might help advance our conversation about where we might look for reductions. Does that help? And then we're going to talk further about how the rest of this fits in too.
Yeah, and you just said there's more information on like more slides, so like it helps a little bit, and I will let you know if I have more questions after you get through the next slides.
Okay.
Thanks. I will just say it helps me a lot of it, especially when I'm thinking about the community-wide survey that we do every 2 years and what they tell us are the priorities for them. And then we have that data that we can compare to the priority-based budgeting. So I look forward to doing that exercise. Yeah. Councilmember Cooper.
Thank you, Mayor Payne. I just want to say I think that it would be premature to be talking about cuts until we had a more clear picture of our revenue forecasts for the future budget here.
Correct. Thank you. Additional questions, comments? Councilmember Vanderpool.
So a couple points of question here. So when we get the details of the recommendations as they make their way to us, when we see them, I often wonder when we're looking at either a budgetary, where we are in the future for our budget, or the way we do things, I always wonder what other cities are doing. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very curious, will the recommendations include alternatives to the way we do things?
Yes, part of their product is because they have done this for hundreds of municipalities throughout the country, they bring those ideas into what they call their insights. That's what their insight report is, to help us think of other ways to either do it or to fund it. Yeah.
Because that's kind of part of it too, right? The public expects us to do certain things, and if we don't have the budget to do it, looking at the alternatives that could get us to that end result without, while meeting the reality of where we are at the budget.
Additional questions or comments? Okay, back to you, Debbie.
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay, we're down the home stretch here. I want to talk a bit about next steps and on budget sustainability, which is really guiding us to our next conversation, which is at the June mid-year retreat. Budget sustainability in 2026 budget, it will be part of your mid-year retreat agenda. I'm going to be discussing the components of kind of that discussion at your retreat with the Finance Committee next week. But generally, I have that discussion in three buckets. One is to continue to see what we learn from information. So for example, excuse me, we'll have the next level of priority-based budgeting that will be informative in terms of what that's starting to tell us. We'll bring you the comparable cities findings, both FTEs per capita per thousand. And the other one that you'd asked about is have our internal support programs kept pace with the growth in other programs? I'll just give you the short story. No, they have not. But we'll talk about that and how our internal services and the size of them that support all the other programs compare to other cities like us. So we'll bring you some more data there. The other thing I heard we'll bring to you is a summary of 2025 reductions by department. So just make sure we root ourselves in where have we already taken reductions that were part of 2025 budget. And then the other thing I want to bring you is a look at the general fund in total minus dedicated revenue, right? So where are your other portions of the general fund that are discretionary in terms of where you could look if you want to take further reductions? It's important for you to see the window of both what you have taken and where your general fund exists in large buckets or small buckets within the rest of the city. So I will bring you that because I heard a request for that. So we'll bring you that. Then I want to also talk a bit about how we're doing. So one of the things that we talk a lot about is our revenues. And I now quarterly look at 5 different indicators of where we're at with our budget. And they're beyond sales tax and B&O. We're also tracking our basic life support transport revenues. We had budgeted to receive $1.9 million, and so we're keeping tabs on where we are throughout the year. I think we had lots of conversations about Nisqually Jail and what our budget is versus how we're actually proceeding there. Last year, as you know, we were over budget in our jail costs, so I'm tracking that. The other thing I'm tracking is development fee fund. So we have an allocation of general fund money we give to the development fee fund, and if development doesn't come in the way we anticipated, our development fee fund runs short, then the general fund has to make up the delta in the development fee fund. So what's relevant here is some of these are revenues, some of them are expenditures, but they all affect in a meaningful way our bottom line, how we end 2025. So I will bring you to your June retreat kind of a look at where we are with all of those indicators, so you kind of have a sense, because I think that'll help with the next conversation. And then the where are we going approach for budget balancing is to both confirm new revenues, where are we going to go or not going to go with B&O, for example, or any other thing that we might learn out of kind of the state level revenues. And then I'm actually going to start the work this Thursday with department directors on what I'm calling developing a framework for building capacity, particularly at year end. So, and how we start to think forward to bring you thoughts and ideas to your mid-year retreat of where we might be able to look at short-term, long-term ideas for controlling budget. And so we're going to have that conversation. We'll look at fund balance again. We'll look at findings from priority-based budgeting. And then armed with information, to Councilmember Drone's question, I wanted to kind of start to discuss with the council an approach to the impacts of any possible further reductions. So it's a conversation I think we need to have together. As you know, we made significant reductions next year. I think it's important to look at where we took those reductions, what's left, take into account where we think we might end the year to the best of our ability with projections. Think about 2026. Here's what we know. We know for sure that we used $4.1 million of fund balance, one-time monies to balance the budget for 2025. So at a minimum, we come into 2026 with a $4.1 million deficit. So Some combination of things are going to close that delta between revenues and building some capacity or some further reductions. And I want to be thoughtful with all of you around how we have that conversation and kind of where we go from here. So, but I'm going to bring you, the department directors are going to bring you an early look at some ideas that we're going to have for doing some of that work. So you'll get a first look at it at your mid-year retreat. Does that help?
Yes, any additional questions or comments? Councilmember Madrone.
Yeah, and having used 4 million in reserves, I assume like in all of this conversation, we'll be talking about how we kind of build that back up because we, dipped into the rainy day on a rainy day, but we want it to be available to us in the future.
Yeah, thank you for that. So, for example, last year around this time, I put spending reductions in place with all departments. We did a hiring freeze, we cut back on expenditures, and the result of that was building our fund balance. So, we had a $7 million fund balance to draw from because we put some savings measures in place to build that capacity. So you have $3 million now, that's above your 10% minimum that you could look at, but that also, if you used all of that, would cut you down to just your 10%, right? And that's not a place I think any of us want to be. So there's some balance of, when I talk about building capacity, I'm talking about building capacity within your fund balance so that we can both lift it and then potentially utilize some of it as balancing 2026 in combination with some other things we might explore as well. So that's kind of what I'm talking about there.
Councilmember Gilman.
So I just want to check, and Councilmember Cooper had prompted me that we want to make sure and check in. This was Finance Committee working with staff's best idea of how to have greater council engagement and briefings along the way. So if there are strong reactions like to the B&O conversation that you're either really excited or really concerned tonight, that would be helpful guidance to give. And I'm glad that at the 6-month point, we'll have 5 months of accounting information, and we will have to have some tough conversations along with the input that we get from priority-based budgeting analysis. And I want to repeat something that Jay said when we were talking this morning, and that's that we can also, in terms of sustainability, this budget sustainability effort isn't an effort to restore reserves by the end of this year. But if we imagine we're planning at least a 5-year window to end up with the services that we want to provide to the city with an eye towards long-term sustainability of maintaining reserves and having adequate revenue to cover the services we want to provide. I think that's the longer project we're doing, along with trying to be calm while we look at this month, look at this month's sales tax and say, is this the time to panic? So anyhow, if you have other direction, this is our best guess of a combination of every finance meeting, a couple of study sessions, both of our retreats this year focused on budget so that we have more time with the budget. But if there are other needs or other concerns, it would be great to throw them out before we move to our next part of the agenda. So.
Thank you for that. Mayor Pro Tem Nguyen.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that, Councilmember Gilman, or the Chair of Finance. I don't have any strong concerns. I just wanted to respond to what you were asking us. For the BNO specifically, I jotted down all of the questions that came up for myself, and then that came up for other council colleagues as well. And so I'll be spending time, as I'm sure the rest of us will be, digging deeper into that. I don't have a strong reaction just so far. Just want to make sure that I'm understanding what the rhyme and reason is for all of our discretionary exemptions, and if I agree with them. And then, and if there's any unintended consequences, right? And then as far as what we'd also talked about parks, and then also priority-based budgeting. I feel really well updated on parks, so I really appreciated staff coming to us early with that, and I think that as a result, we didn't have a lot of questions for Silvana, myself included, and just really, really excited for the priority-based budgeting. And I guess just kind of a big thank you to staff, of course, but then also to the finance. This year's finance committee is it's kind of a daunting time right now with the possible loss of federal funding, trying to dry us out because we're sticking to our values. I mean, how terrible is that? And so I just am so glad that we have smart folks both on staff and on our finance committee that is trying to make sure that not only can we get through the current time, but then we're for the better long term. So thanks so much. No big concerns here. I'll just keep looking into it.
Councilmember Madrone.
Yeah, I have no big concerns. A little bit of hesitancy. I see the direction we're going. And I think this is the best engagement we've had as a council on our budgeting process. So, huge props to that. I think one of the things that we've talked about in the past around different options for revenue is making sure that it's clear why we're exploring different types of revenue and the struggling through this challenge together. And so my hesitancy comes in with waiting to see what, a potential gap is before we start talking about potential reductions. I think we, I see a pathway here where we have options in front of us, but I also see, for me, there's a little bit of lack in clarity in terms of the options around reductions, and having things put in front of us where we say, that's a reduction we might have to make versus that's a reduction we don't want to have to make. And so that's what I'm struggling with here is just helping, working through that together, having the public see us struggle through a tough budget year rather than just, we'll get to a certain point and that what's put in front of us is the package that we accept. And maybe we're just not there yet. I'm just, I have a little bit of just trepidation around just making sure that we have tough conversations together.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. And we're not there yet, right? Where I could put a package of anything in front of you, right? I think last year a lot of work was done at the staff level to try to look at sets of reductions that stayed away from a lot of the priorities and things we were trying to hold on to. This conversation, if we have to go there with more reductions, it is going to be a lot harder this year. And I'm going to need direction from all of you about what you just said was really important. What's touchable, what's not touchable, right? What do we want to stay away from? Where are you open to seeing further reductions if we need to take them? The building capacity piece is one piece of that. How do we both build up fund balance and then also look at where we've taken reductions before, what's left, where does the general fund money sit, and then engage you around a framework and an approach for how we might consider further reductions so that when I bring you something, it's not out of left field, it's in alignment with the conversation we have at your mid-year retreat. Does that help?
Thank you. Councilmember Green.
Yeah, I think my brain was going in a similar direction to yours, Jay, in that I recognize that a mid-year retreat is going to be much too soon to talk about any specific, do we think about percentage cuts? Do we think, I get it, it's just way too soon, but I feel like for me, it would be a nice takeaway from that to think about, kind of what you said, but for lack of a better term, guiding principles of as we approach a budget, what is most important to us, whether that's in ads or in reductions or in whatever those answers are. But I feel like if we can get to a place where we say these are what's important to us as a council in terms of the budget, it'll help make some decision making, I think, a little easier later when we actually have to look at, whatever it is.
Part of the reason that I'm going to start engaging the department directors actually this week a little earlier is, we met as a budget sustainability team and started talking about framework for having this conversation on Thursday. And out of that, some big ideas came forward that I hadn't even considered before and I won't spoil them. But, you know, because there are some concepts around how we bridge from one year to the next, and think about whether or not we want to bridge because we might have a conversation about levy lift, or we bridge because we might want to have other conversations. And so, you know, when you're bridging, you make different decisions than when you want to make a permanent change, right? And so when I talk about framework and approach, that's part of it. So what's our goal? If our goal is to bridge from one year to the next, we're going to make different decisions than we might make if we're saying, you know what, any other revenues or any future conversations we don't want to have, so we need to make them now, right? So that'll be important to all of this, and how deep and how far you go.
Councilmember Vanderpool.
You know, and another part of this I think about when we get our recommendations, and I would be also like there's restructuring of the way things are paid for. We just got a presentation on parks and how that's a very sustainable system. I often find that the way we collect fees around for CP&D or CPED to not be very progressive. The way we structure feeing construction and development, and how expensive it is to build an ADU in the city and this and that. I think that restructuring, rethinking the way other cities collect its funds for different departments should be part of that conversation, because I don't want to lose those departments, but I also do not want to. I think that sometimes the structures themselves do not help the public move along those parts of those projects. Do you get what I'm saying?
I would love to talk to you about what you mean by that, because, you know, when I hear certain words, at another time, maybe not now, but when I hear certain words, I often wonder, what do people mean by that? Like, not very progressive, how so? Yeah, just a thought that's coming to mind.
Yeah, so we want to have housing in the city of Olympia, right? We have a housing shortage and we need to get there. It doesn't help us when we try to having missing middle updates if the impact fees around developing an ADU is really expensive and not practical for a small developer. And so, to me, a progressive revenue would be trying to find a way that when people go in to do a permit for the city, or they need to work to get approval, the impact fees, the fees structured around doing those improvements, isn't the funding for the department. So in a way, it's like, how do we find a way to pay for it without every time you have to do an improvement? Because we want people to improve. We want people to build ADUs. We want people to build missing middle. We want to get that housing. But I often feel that the tax structure, the fee structure around that isn't as progressive as it could be, in the sense that it's expensive to do on the public side.
That's helpful, thank you. City Manager Bernie.
Yeah, and I think to that end, too, we've looked at, for example, you know, you put an affordable housing emergency in place, which ADUs qualify for. So I think we're trying to get at some of that. And I think long-term, the general fund will have to support some of those programs, right, in a more meaningful way, to make permit fee reductions and infrastructure assistance really pencil out. I think that's going to be a part of our 2026 budget conversation as well. We also have a lot of exemption programs for some of our other fees that we charge for low income. So certainly we'll have those conversations as we continue down this path. But I understand what you're saying. I think there's going to be more conversation, you know, in the future about how we fund various programs and how we continue to get affordable housing built in particular, and missing middle housing built in our community at a faster rate than we're seeing it.
Councilmember Gilman.
And I just want to check my understanding on this conversation, because I understand that impact fees don't fund CP&D, but broadly fund all different efforts around the city that are impacted by additional people living in the city.
Yeah.
And then the fees that fund a good portion of CP&D are just the fees alone. So maybe we can take Charlie out for some more walks around the block and think about but I just want to separate out the impact fee conversation from the the fee conversation, and they both are worthy of these conversations about exemptions and prioritization, but I want to put them into two separate containers, so, yeah.
Yeah, it's a great point. Thanks. Additional questions or comments? I guess now would be the time for me to weigh in on the question we were posed by the chair of finance. I don't have any concerns at this point. Yeah, I would say, yeah, in my time here, this is definitely one of the most thorough presentations we've had on the budget, so thank you. I know it's been a big lift. Debbie, you spoke to this earlier about the pace with which you have to do all this work and moving very quickly. Joan, sorry. But what I will say is that I know that, you know, the potential reductions that we're talking about and all of that, this is precisely why the priority-based budgeting, you bringing this to us now, I think is very timely, because it's going to help us understand not only what reductions, but what's the impact and where it will live and how we communicate that to the public in a way that they can see and understand, I think is amazing that we're going to be able to do that, especially if we start getting into the conversations around reductions in areas that we have avoided, you know, because they are priorities for us. And so I think that's going to help us tremendously in that sense. Just in terms of the conversations around B&O and our exemptions, I don't have any concerns at this point. I think the devil is in the details, as the saying goes, on that sort of thing. But from what I'm hearing tonight, I say let's keep moving forward and exploring that and looking into that. Yeah. And yeah, I think we're off to a great start here, I think. So I look forward to the retreat next month to get an update there and see where we are. But I'm excited about being able to tell the story of our budget, for better or for worse. So, yeah. All right. Any additional questions or comments? All right. City Manager Bernie.
Yeah, I'll take you home here. I do want to give, as we're doing shout outs, last year into this year, it's a heavy lift for all of us, including the department directors, and their leadership. Most of them are here tonight, but their leadership to help me and you navigate this, couldn't do it without them. They're the ones that are bringing forward the really good ideas. They're the ones that are really helping us set a tone. They're the ones helping us figure out what we can do and what we can't do and what the impacts are. And so they'll continue to be part of your conversation at your mid-year retreat as well. But I just want to give a shout out to, we have an amazing group of department directors, and I'm grateful to have them by my side. Okay, just as you look at the 2026 budget calendar, you know, we're starting our conversations early, but this just a look, this is just our normal budget calendar. We do budget kickoff with the department directors in June. That's when they really, I give them some direction. I'll refine that direction post our retreat, but they'll start to work on their inputs into Workday. And then by September, we'll have our first look at what's there. So in August, I typically meet with all the departments, and the finance team tells us what really is our gap and what are the assumptions they've made. And then we'll work with finance committee to start to refine those assumptions and work towards coming to council for the first time in October. And what I want to work as a rhythm with all of you is that we do good work at your mid-year retreat so that October 7th, whatever we present to you is not a surprise, right? That we've been engaged in it and we're all pointing in the same direction in terms of what's there. And I'll continue to work with the council and the finance committee along the way to make sure that's where we're at. Because I think part of the feedback I got from all of you in January was, you know, it's really hard to look at for the first time reductions in October and then have just a couple of months to make decisions. So I hear you on that. So we'll continue to work this process so that you have more advanced kind of look at these things. So I think that's a real good process improvement for this year, and I'm happy to be at this place with you. I also want to say that just towards long-term budget sustainability, I hope, and I think you do too, that we get to a day where budget doesn't consume your annual retreat and your mid-year retreat year after year after year, right? I mean, I had one of the department directors say last week, it's really hard to be in this state every year, right? Hence budget sustainability. We have to find a way over the next 3 to 4 years to become more sustainable so this doesn't drive our conversations every single year. And I know you want to get there too, so we'll do that work together. So that's it for us tonight. Just want to say thank you for the conversation tonight. It's helpful. We all took all the questions and feedback, so we'll work this into our prep for your June retreat. And then also, I'm sure in our one-on-ones over the next couple of weeks or so, we'll talk more individually about things you're interested in so we can keep this conversation moving forward. But that's what we got for you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager Burney. Any additional questions or comments from the council? All right, seeing none, that concludes our only business on our agenda for tonight. So we'll recess for, I'm going to say up to 10 minutes so that maybe we can put the chambers back in order. And then we'll reconvene upstairs in room 423 for a closed session related to labor negotiations. No decisions will be made. And after that closed session, which will be up to 60 minutes, we will be adjourned for tonight.